want to share my screen. So hopefully you should be able to see my screen with any luck. Excellent. Wonderful. Yep. So thank you very much for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here to talk about something that I'm very passionate about. It may be for uncomfortable viewing, but I will do my very best. So my name is Peter, my pronouns are he and him, and the topic I want to talk about today is resisting invisibility. So just to take you through the kind of content of the session today, I'm going to reference the pre-task, also then look at representation and some fairly simple things of why, how, and then but what if, because of course there are certain questions around representing LGBTQIA plus identities in ELT classrooms or in ELT materials that maybe we need to address. And then I'll finish off with a conclusion. So if you had registered for the event previously, hopefully you will have seen my pre-task. And this was a task to have a quick read of the article which was on the British Council website called What is Inclusion and How Do We Implement It? And then I asked you to make notes on why is inclusion important in ELT materials. And for this, I'm going to ask you to interact with me just a little bit. So if you can, you should see on the screen a link to a website called Slido. You can either use the QR code, or you can go online at slido.com, number 86272. Oh, sorry, no, number 8672391. Get it right, Peter. Or, of course, you can use the comments. And what I'd like you to input is your thoughts on why is inclusion important in ELT materials. Now, hopefully, if you've seen some of the previous webinars, you would have got some ideas already about this, especially from the first webinar from Sajani, which I thought was incredible. But also the speakers in the second webinar were also really very good at showing why representation and why inclusion is important. And I can see that it's already working. So thank you very much. It's really quite exciting. So yes, I can see belonging, to see yourself in images for better understanding, a safer learning environment, equality for all, acceptance. Oh, these are all really, really good. Thank you very much. To relate to the materials, which I think is a really important thing. Good support, not assuming pronouns. These are incredible. I don't think I've ever had so many people typing at the same time. So thank you very much. To learn from others, which I think is a really important thing to remember, especially when we're talking about inclusion. To introduce learners, thank you, Yelena, to introduce learners to diversity and shaping and sense of equality. Yes, I think agree. I don't see any LGBTQIA plus characters in mainstream ELT. It could well be alienating. However, I suppose what I'm trying to do with the work that I do in the sessions that I give is to show that we can represent LGBTQIA plus identities in a fairly, I hate to say it, but in a fairly normal way, so that people get used to seeing different identities within course books. And that rather large respect there, which I think is, again, essential. Thank you all so very, very much. To mirror the real world, to expand knowledge, to help all our students. Oh, thank you. Thank you very, very much. Yes, to normalize different identities. That's it. Absolutely. Thank you all very much. I might be able to take a screenshot of this a bit later and share through my socials. So I'm going to move on from this particular page and then go to the next page. So representation, when we think about, thank you, Helen, utilizing, yes, I'll be talking about that a little bit later. So when we talk about representation here, I'm thinking about representation in classroom materials, but also in the classroom itself. And I do have to say as well that I do realize that there are some countries that criminalize LGBTQIA plus identities. Now, what I'm not trying to do here is to change that. That's something I think that cannot be changed just through a flick of a switch. But I will be addressing countries where maybe more conservative, who don't necessarily accept LGBTQIA plus identities. And I'll be looking at that a little bit later. But what I do thank everybody here for being is being respectful and allowing me to come here and to talk about really part of my identity. So thank you very much. So representation. If we have a look at this particular image, it's an image of 4 people standing on a beach in front of a sea, in front of the sea or in front of the ocean. And what I'd like you to do is in the chat to think, what kind of themes or topics could you discuss with this image? And I can already see some things happening already in the chat. So thank you very much. Yes. Family matters, equal treatment, family relationship, family, teamwork. I didn't think of that one actually myself. Vacations, dressing the same. Yes. The notion of eternity, lovely. Gender, vacation, family ties, love, isolation, good. I find a lot of the topics in ELT materials tends to focus on really being positive things, but something that we don't necessarily try to talk about is maybe the negative things that people experience. Isolation, of course, is one of them. Peace, quality time, support, resilience, togetherness, reflection, grief. All of these are fantastic, and I think have gone much further than I expected. Exactly, I would have said, for me, I would have looked at this as family in spending important time with your family. Exactly, Francisca, this is a typical family. It may be connected to our interpretation, and it may not actually be a family. Good, thank you all very much. The next thing, though, is again, it's with the same image, but I'd like you to think who or what is missing from this image. What kind of things a pet is missing exactly. We might often talk about pets in our course books, in our materials, in our classroom. Grandparents, yes, so extended family is missing. The faces are missing, exactly. So we can't really discern what kind of emotion they are feeling. Every single nuclear family structure, every single family structure that isn't represented by the nuclear family, a single mother or a solo parent, absolutely, expressions, these are all missing from this image. And of course, queer parents, of course, if we want to adapt our materials to be more inclusive, to be more expressive of what society brings and of what society is there. Exactly. Sorry, I keep looking at the comments because they're really interesting. Color, yes. Race and ethnicity is missing from here. So this is a fairly typical nuclear, heteronormative, non-disabled, maybe it's a middle-class group of people. These are all missing from this image. And yet we see these images a lot in ELT materials and in materials that maybe teachers may bring to the classroom. So let's see if you thought about the same kind of things that I did. So these are the sorts of things that I thought were missing, and things and people and identities that I think that as English language teachers and professionals, we should be representing. So we've got the global South. By this, what I mean is what has been classed as non-Western. So now the idea of Western society has become a little bit problematic. And so now in diversity, equity, and inclusion, we talk about the global South and the global North. Not necessarily geographically North or geographically South, but these are kind of catch-all terms to describe what we would say in the past as Western and non-Western. Body size. This is another thing that I'm quite passionate about. Mainly in ELT materials, we see slim, tall, blonde, white people with a fairly fit body size. And when we see somebody of a larger size, the books tend to make fun of them, or they show a larger man trying to do some exercise, but trying to chase a hamburger or something like this. And this can be really, really harmful. So we need to think not just about not really showing stereotypical ideas. So other things on here include disability. As Sajini said in the first webinar, there are different types of disability, some that you can see, some that you can't see. So physical disabilities, neurodiverse disabilities, sight impairments, hearing impairments, all these sorts of disabilities needs to be represented. Exactly. With my beliefs, I've got on the screen, this is where I think about religion. Why can't we talk about religion in ELT materials? It can be a huge part of people's lives and of their actual life. Spirituality, exactly. Some people may not have religious beliefs. And I think that we should really be reflecting real life within our ELT materials. Other examples here, I've got ethnicity and race, gender identity, neurodiversity, socioeconomic status, and sexual orientation. One thing I do have to say about sexual orientation, which I don't cover necessarily later on, is that a lot of people say to me, when you're talking about sexual orientation within the classroom, aren't you teaching students about sex? No, this is not true. So incorporating LGBTQIA plus identities in ELT materials is not about sexualizing identities. It's about humans. It's about human people. So it's not about sex. Okay, and I think I need to somehow make this clear. As Sandra says, yes, gender, that's it. Discrimination, yes. Exactly, as Helen says, seeing heterosexual couples isn't about sex. So why would seeing homosexual or queer couples be about sex? Exactly. So moving on. talking about why do I believe that LGBTQIA plus identities, as well as other identities? On the previous slide, I mentioned lots of different marginalized identities. We have intersectional identities. So there may be a person of color who is disabled, who is also in a relationship, in a heterosexual relationship. There may be somebody from Vietnam who is in a bisexual relationship. So there are different parts of our identity that make up who we are. So it's important to remember that everybody has an intersectional identity, and we should all be represented and seen in that way. So why positive representation matters? And in previous talks that I've given, I've talked about this particular quote from Marian Wright Edelman. And Marian Wright Edelman is an American activist for civil rights and for children's rights. And she is the founder of the Children's Defense Fund. And this quote comes from a documentary. And the reference to the documentary is on the handout that you'll get at the end of the webinar. And if you can't see it, it says, "You can't be what you can't see." And this resonates a lot with me. And I'll tell you why on the next slide. But positive representation can help to build confidence in the person who it represents. It allows that person to feel seen. It allows that person to feel as if they belong. But also it helps to dismantle stereotypes. If we don't talk about things that maybe people don't always understand, how can we dismantle those stereotypes if not through education? And teaching English as a foreign language is part of that education. We are teaching students to be a part of the world. It may be they may come from a country where being part of the LGBTQIA plus community is against the law, but there may still be students in those countries who feel as if they are LGBTQIA plus. And so allowing them to see a potential representation of who they might be is so important. And I talk about this from personal experience. Now, I grew up in the United Kingdom, which supposedly is very good at LGBTQIA plus rights and understanding. However, in the 1980s, so from 1988 until the year 2000 in Scotland and the year 2003 in England and Northern Ireland, educational institutions were effectively banned from even mentioning LGBTQIA plus identities. Now, I was born in 1978, so when I was 10, I was just about to start secondary school. And so this would be 1988. And so I went through my whole secondary career, if you like, not being exposed to any potential LGBTQIA plus role models or any people that maybe I could identify with. In the law, it actually said that education should not promote the teaching in any maintained school, so any state school, of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. Now, this is something that when I look back on with horror, and I look back on with shame. I felt ashamed that my country's government decided to put this into law, and it tended to affect me throughout my school education, but also my adulthood after that. So I finished university in the year 2000 in England. And in England, of course, it was still against the law in secondary schools to talk about LGBTQIA plus identities. And so for my early 20s, I felt as if I wasn't worthy. I felt unseen. I felt quite underconfident, and also a sense of almost self-hate. And it took a long time for me to be able to get past these things and to actually value myself as a person, as being part of the LGBTQIA plus is part of my identity, and to celebrate that. And so what I want to do with the work that I'm doing is to enable any ELT student or teacher, for that matter, who may be questioning who they are, or who maybe knows who they are, to not feel alone, to not feel different, to feel as if they do belong, to feel as if they are worthy, and to feel as if they are seen in materials. So the main reason why I'm interested in this is because, of course, Section 28, which is what I've just talked about. But throughout my teaching career of 17 years, there was really no representation of LGBTQIA plus identities. There was an incident during teaching. I'll go through it briefly. And that was, I was in a class with a group of students. And for some reason, we got talking about homosexual people, I think. I don't know where it came from, but there started to be some quite negative language being thrown around the classroom. And so eventually we came to a break, and I had to go and ask my manager, what should I do? Should I tell them who I am? Should I not? They said that it was completely up to me. So in the end, I went back after the break and I said to them, you know, those people that you were talking about, who you were being quite nasty about, you're describing somebody like me, excuse me. And this kind of shocked them, to think that maybe they were talking about an identity of somebody in the classroom. And this is true. We can't assume who people are. We can't assume if they are a member of the LGBTQIA plus community or not. And that's why I think representation is hugely important, because we're not going to go and ask students, oh, by the way, are you this identity? Are you that identity? It's not something that we should be doing. We should be showing a more open classroom, showing that different identities are valid, different identities are real, and different identities are valued. There are certain materials that are out there, but they tend to be quite harmful and quite damaging to LGBTQIA plus identities. Questions such as, would you employ a gay person? Why or why not? It doesn't do anything to help the LGBTQIA plus community. What it does is it invites an attack on the very identity of the community. And so this is where I'm going to move on to talk about how. And I'm going to talk about three different things. And these three things are visibility, utilization, and disruption. So the first one, visibility. This is something that I see as being within the classroom itself. So within the classroom environment, maybe you might have national flags up. Maybe you might have posters up in your classroom. Maybe you might have pictures of family, for example. So why not have more inclusive pictures, more inclusive posters that may be up within the classroom? So displaying different diverse images of people that demonstrates to the students that you are an inclusive class, that you value anyone's identity. To ensure that if you have a library, or if your school has a library, to have some LGBTQIA plus stories or books within there, because again, representation matters. You might want to see if you can incorporate LGBTQIA plus identities within the curriculum. But again, this has to be done with respect and also with some care, where you would have to speak to somebody within the community to ensure that it's not offensive or that it's not damaging. Usualization is something that Helen said earlier in the chat. And also, I saw the word normalize. So usualization, for me, is better than using normalize. If we use normalize, we are assuming that there is an abnormal. So let's say if we normalize LGBTQIA plus identities, this assumes that LGBTQIA plus identities are abnormal. They're not. I can tell you from experience, I am a perfectly normal human being. I just maybe might like or love different people to you. That's all it is. Usualization comes from Professor Sue Sanders, who is the founder of LGBT plus History Month UK. And this is where she says that in materials, people's identities are usual. So we may see people going to work because LGBTQIA plus people work. We may see people doing hobbies because we all like hobbies. It may talk about their families, for example. It's showing different identities, not just LGBTQIA plus, but all the marginalized identities, religion, race, ethnicity, disability, neurodiversity, age, body size, as part of society, because that's who we are. We are part of society. We're not highlighted as something special or different. And even, I'll show you an example, but even we don't necessarily have to state that this person is gay, or this person is trans, or this person is non-binary. We can take that from context. And again, yes, there will be an example. I quite like using usualization approach because it shows and it demonstrates to teachers and to students that we do exist as a usual society. However, there are also occasions where we maybe need to be a little bit more direct. And in this case, this is where I would talk about disruption. So disruption for me, and I have to reference Tyson Seaburn here in his book, How to Write Inclusive Materials, because he explains it a little bit more in detail. Disruption confronts social issues. So for example, why are some people discriminated against? What can we do to stop discrimination? Why are people prejudiced? What can be done for this? So it highlights the characteristics and experiences of marginalized communities. And please remember, I'm talking all marginalized communities here. It focuses on the truth. So why are some people poor? Why are some people rich? And to look at maybe how we can balance the inequality. So it also encourages students to look at critical thinking, to look at how these things happen. I do realize that this may not be appropriate for all contexts. I'm very well aware of this. However, these are my suggestions. But I do recognize that maybe some teachers who maybe want to do this may be tied by certain policies. Some teachers may be restricted by the country that they're in. But again, I've got a few more suggestions for that. So this is one example. This is one of my resources, and it's called The Place Where. And with this particular resource, it's aimed at B1 plus B2 students of the CEFR, and it focuses on relative clauses. The vocabulary generally looks at activities and hobbies related to water. And within it, sorry, I'm just closing my door a bit. Within it, it talks about some reading, some writing, and some speaking as well. And this is, for me, a good example of what I think a usualized and then a disrupted teaching resource should be. So this is the reading here, and this is using a usualized approach. The text, I know it's very small. We don't necessarily need to read it, but the text is about a surfer who comes from Colombia. I just so happened to choose a surfer who had a disability. So it's a surfer who has a prosthetic leg. Again, this is another example of usualization where I don't necessarily point out the difference within the text. It just is there. It's part of his identity. Within the text, I also use the target grammar, but I also usualize his identity as a gay man. So he talks about, or the text talks about, his previous partner, whose name was Alberto. His name is Vicente. Further on, I talk about the lesbian identity, but again, it's usualized. It's not necessarily pointing out that this person is a lesbian or this person is gay. It is just a usual part of society. And with this kind of way, I think it's really important for students to see that marginalized groups are part of everyday life and they're part of everyday society. On the more disruptive approach, this follows on later in the resource. And so it talks about LGBT plus people with a disability. So it confronts social issues, such as the problems that maybe LGBT plus disabled people may face, but it also asks why this may happen. So there's an examination of how marginalization might happen. But then also there's an encouragement of critical thinking about how we can make things better for disabled LGBT plus people. And what I have found is that students do tend to react quite well to these sorts of materials because it's not something they've seen before. And if I'm completely honest, I find that maybe the younger generation are much more in tune with what's going on around the world than somebody of my age, for example. However, there aren't always a lot of good LGBT plus materials out there because a lot of publishers will avoid talking about the topic. So what can we do with any materials that we actually have and that we actually use? So there are different ways that we can adapt. And here I've just picked up a few different ideas, a few different things that we can do as teachers relating to any course books or materials that we already use. So let's say, for example, that your course book talks about pronouns and it goes through I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they, for example. Why not put in they, them pronouns? Maybe you can write on the board, did you know that some people use they, them pronouns? And then give an example. So this is whoever, and cross out she or he and put they are a designer, because this does exist and non-binary people exist and non-binary people are valid. And so we need to be able to demonstrate to our students that all identities are valid in this way. Another possible thing from Face to Face, a book that I used to use many years ago, the text there talks about Mr. Average breaks the law every day. First of all, why isn't it Mrs.? So here we are already alienating women, but why can't we ask students about different other forms of address? So we've got maybe Ms, we've got Miss, we've got Mrs, we've also got Mix as well, which is MX. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. I think I would say Mix, but other people may choose to pronounce it in a different way. The next page I've got, again, looking at ways to adapt existing materials. So we have that picture that we looked at very early on with the family. So here you could ask students to discuss different family structures, because different family structures do exist, as we saw in the comments. So there may be solo parents, there may be adopted families, there may be foster families, there may be families with two fathers, with two mothers. I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a gay family or a lesbian family. I would say that this is a family, because that's who they are. They're not just a lesbian family. They are a family. So that's describing who they are. Maybe a family with no children. Maybe a family with a pet, for example. So there's not just one definition of a family, and you might be able to find out more about your students if you talk about the different types of family structures that maybe they see. If students don't want to talk about their own family structure, you may want to ask them to discuss family structures that they've seen on television, in newspapers, in books, for example. So allowing them to have some semblance of privacy is also important. Underneath that, we've got the warm-up here. So it's to think of 5 well-known people from different countries. And you'll see that in the sentence starters, it says his name is, he's from, her name is, she's from. And again, here you could add their name is, they are from. Or you could ask students to research non-binary celebrities, and then that can point out the use of they and them. Also in English file, we have this text here with Graham Norton. Now, Graham Norton is a gay Irish TV host. This isn't necessarily mentioned in the text anywhere, which is okay. But if you wanted to extend to ask students to find out more about him, they may come across the fact that he is a gay man. And then you are showing representation of different identities within your classroom. However, what if? What if? Discrimination. So, challenging discrimination, and this is kind of almost my final slide. The biggest thing is, especially if you are in a country where it may be dangerous to talk about LGBTQIA plus identities, in a company where you may be discriminated against for talking about LGBTQIA plus communities, the key thing is to be safe. So keep yourself safe and keep your students safe, because no amount of representation is worth being in danger. That's the key thing. I'll let you read the other challenges here, but I will say is that challenging homophobia, challenging transphobia, biphobia is not about changing people's minds. I see it as a teaching opportunity to be able to allow students to express their opinions, but in a non-offensive way. So really all views are valid unless they are harmful or hurtful to others. It's bigotry and discrimination. So bigotry, they are connected to each other. Bigotry refers to attitudes or beliefs that are prejudiced towards a particular group, especially based on stereotypes or things that people have learnt. Discrimination, on the other hand, is where actions or behaviours that treat people differently based on their identity may kind of manifest. So they're very similar, but bigotry is much more of a kind of an ingrown thing. I'm not sure. I like to think that it can be unlearned, but we'll see. But these are the kind of challenges that I see for teaching LGBTQIA plus identities. And remember, it's not teaching how to be LGBTQI plus, because you can't teach that. It's just teaching about. It's teaching respect. It's teaching understanding, acceptance. For me, not tolerance. I don't need to be tolerated. I need to be respected. I need to be respected. So finally, my last slide is my conclusion. And there are 4 things here. So the LGBTQIA plus community deserves to be seen and deserves to be represented, as do, as a caveat, as do all marginalized identities. If we're talking about inclusion, DEI, we can't leave anybody behind. By discussing LGBTQIA plus identities in the classroom, it allows students to learn about and accept and hopefully respect different identities. With better representation in classrooms, in materials, it should help to foster better understanding and less discrimination as well. And that really is the key thing for me. And for me, LGBTQIA plus identities are not a taboo for me. I have some final resources here. The QR code goes to my website, where there are some resources, free and paid. They don't all talk about LGBTQIA+, but the majority of them do. I would also suggest to check out Pearson Education, Schools Out, LGBT+ History Month, the Proud Trust, the Global Centre, especially within their Knowledge Hub, and also Twinkle as well. And yeah, that's kind of it. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for having me here and for allowing me to talk about this.
This. Fantastic.
I'll stop sharing now.
Would you want to leave it up just for a second? Oh, okay.
Just in case. I'm too quick. I'll do it again.
Okay, just in case.
There we are.
People didn't quite get the QR code, so there you go. Brilliant. Thanks, Peter. That was amazing. Really, really, yeah. And thank you for sort of personal kind of stories there in history and stuff. It's really. Section 28, I guess, is something that a lot of people maybe not. I certainly didn't kind of know that this was a law. I mean, it seems incredible now that that's actually a thing.
I know. Yeah.
And the thing is,
in Kent, where I come from, in the southeast of England, After Section 28 finished in 2003, the council voted to continue it within the county. And I think that only stopped in 2011, I think.
Wow. Okay. Where do we go from there? I mean, it's funny. The thing is, we talk about that, and we talk about that as something in the past, and sort of a little bit with dinosaurs, etc., and that, you know, now we live in this tolerant world. And then you kind of read about books being banned in the States, and, you know, parents complaining because a Disney film had a character in it that XYZ, blah 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 blah, and you just think, well, when is this? I don't know. I think people, I don't know, there's this threat almost that people feel. And, you know, the question really should be, is this doing you any harm? If it's not, then what's the problem, you know? So, but there's this whole notion that, oh, well, you use these books or you do this in the class, and then everyone else is going to become this and that and the other. And it's just this, anyway, it's kind of bizarre, but thank you, really. I mean, and just, some fantastic ideas in there as well, I think, about you know, addressing and bringing that sort of inclusion into the classroom without, as you sort of said at the beginning, I think, you know, and towards the end where you talked about, you know, be safe. Just obviously you're not going to go to a country where you know, homosexuality or whatever is illegal and say, just ignore that, do this, because obviously they're going to end up in prison or, you know, worse, you know. So it's I guess sort of on that, and just kind of thinking about the sort of the thread for me that's kind of run through that whole session is little things that you can kind of do or adjust or add. It's not about huge wholesale changes, right? I mean, that seems to be the message.
Absolutely. I don't think that teachers should go in and say, today we're going to talk about being gay, or we're going to talk about being a lesbian. Because then it's making it seem like it's something different or something that needs special treatment. If we do it in a usualized way, then we can see that actually LGBTQIA plus people are part of society. We just exist like anybody else exists.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's true, isn't it? It is that usual, as you say, utilization. I'm glad you've said that, because I would have used normalized, but then kind of thinking, oh, okay, the opposite is so it's okay. Sorry, I could just sort of talk to you really long time about this, but we've got questions from people, so I should probably kind of okay. So Ceci Bereth, sorry, I didn't complete. Okay, I was wondering how we can teach these aspects and be inclusive. Okay, students, parents.
Yes, it's an interesting one. I think this would need to go to a kind of a whole school or a whole company approach. So it would depend whether the school is openly supportive of all identities. If not, then it would be quite unfair for a teacher to go in with any marginalized identities and say, we're going to talk about this, when it hasn't necessarily been visible that this might be the case. So for me, this does go back to school management, but also potentially about what the country's government has suggested for curriculum input. And this is why I think visibilizing maybe is the first step to check with school managers whether you can celebrate LGBT History Month, or whether you can put up images of different family structures. And that would really be the first step. But really, you do need to know your students. As previous webinars have said, it's important to do that so that you don't kind of unwittingly offend someone, because people do get offended by LGBT plus identities. But yeah, I think it's a whole school approach first. And then parents can decide whether their child goes to that school or not, and whether the school actually has an inclusion policy or some kind of statement of commitment that would also be good. If one does exist, then if the teacher wants to incorporate marginalized identities, then they can point to this inclusion statement.
I mean, yeah, schools should have an inclusion policy, really, shouldn't they? I mean,
They should.
Yeah. I love the idea of just, just something simple like flags or days, special days, I mean, we do, we celebrate Christmas, we celebrate whatever, why not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Pride or something, it's just another day that is celebrated by people. So,
yeah, by some people, of course, because Christmas isn't celebrated
exactly
by all people. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions. I mean, the question from Sandra here, I think you kind of covered the talk about other resources or printed resources.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got your own resources there. Do you think, I suppose the kind of the thing that I wanted to pick up with that question was at the end, where publishers, I mean, if you're working with publishers, do you see a sort of a gradual shift to, I don't know, is it changing?
Things are changing, but slowly, as well as if they try to kind of incorporate all different identities. They have to consider a lot of different things. They have to make sure that the materials are written kind of well, and they're written so that they're not stereotypical, because of course materials from 20 years ago, even they're still available now, are still fairly stereotypical in terms of gender. So women's roles, for example, there are no disabled people that are noticeable. So there's a lot for them to do. But I do think that LGBTQIA plus identities are probably going to be the last ones to be represented, because it is the only marginalized group at the moment that are criminalized in certain countries. And so I think things are changing, editorial guidelines are changing, but it's going to take a good few years to see any discernible change within materials.
Okay. I guess with a lot of publishers, they produce versions for different markets, don't they? So I mean, there's no reason potentially why, they couldn't produce a version which is for a region where it's not criminalized and so on, and not. But yeah, okay. Okay, that's good to hear that things are changing, however slowly. Okay, a couple of questions from Helen, who's our presenter coming up in 20 minutes.
Oh yes, I'm staying for her, for them. I'm staying for them.
So the first question, I think you kind of again covered the small and easy to prepare but more meaningful ways teachers can include LGBTQIA plus issues, identities in the classroom. I mean, you kind of talked about some of the activities there. The second question that they wrote is an interesting one. What can teachers do to reduce any worry or anxiety that teachers might feel?
I think it's quite true that some teachers may feel anxious or extremely worried about incorporating any identity that they don't necessarily identify with, possibly because they don't have lived experience of that identity. But then my answer for that would be, look for materials that are created by someone from that community. So whether you are trying to represent disabled people, see if you can find a resource or materials written by someone with a disability. If you're trying to represent LGBTQIA plus identities, look for materials that are written by someone within that community, because we kind of, we don't know everything about the whole community, but we kind of have experience of being part of it. And so therefore it's going to be more true to life than having someone not from the community writing about it. And that's what I hope that publishers will do when they start to incorporate different identities, that they use the lived experience from people within the communities they're trying to represent to be able to create authentic materials So they really need to diversify their teams, I think. But that's for a whole other webinar, I think.
Oh, good. Are you offering to come and do another one?
Oh, potentially.
Good. This is being recorded, Peter, so I've got every video evidence.
I know, I realise that.
But you said potentially, so that's not a yes, is it? Anyway, okay, all right. Okay, just looking at the chat, because there's a lot of
there is a lot going on there, and what I like to see in there is the respect.
Yeah.
I know that talking about LGBTQIA plus identities is not for everyone, but what I'm trying not to get emotional, but what I really have noticed about the chat is that it's respectful, and that's all that I can ask for, really. So,
Okay.
thank you very much.
No, thank you, and thank you everyone for that respect as well. Certainly in the main, it's no, well, I think, yeah, I don't know, yeah, I've stopped myself getting emotional now as well. I think we're probably going to have to stop there just very quickly. Bushra, will I receive a certificate? Yes, you will. There's been lots and lots of links in the chat, but you will get an email. So anyone else who's wondering about certificates, you will get those. And yeah, I think we'll probably end it there for not today's sessions, but for this particular session, because we have Helen Slee coming up in 50 minutes. So if you want to stay for their session, then please do. You'll kind of get kicked out of here in a minute and you'll be put back into the lobby, but then you can join Helen in about 15 minutes. So looking forward to that one. Peter, thank you ever so much. It's been fantastic, really, really fantastic. I really enjoyed it a lot. And so, yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And thanks everyone for coming along. Thank you for your contributions in the chat and questions, and we will hopefully see you in about 15 minutes. So goodbye for now.